Ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to introduce Marti Morrison and Randy Ham. They're going to tell you about, Marty is a jazz musician, jazz drummer, has been all over the world, and he's going to tell you all his stories. We will present to you Marti Morrison.
All right, thanks for being here. Thanks, Chico. I'm Randy Ham, and Marty and I have been friends for 35 years. We met almost the day that I moved to Springfield to start teaching at the then Southwest Missouri State, and happy to be here with all you folks with Music Monday. So without further ado, I'm going to be asking Marty a few questions to get him going. Once he gets talking, he can go for hours, trust me. And so we're just going to start at the beginning, and why don't you talk a little bit about where you're from and how your life was growing up, and how you got into music.
Yeah.
Is there family
Yes.
musicians? And so.
Yeah, hey everybody. I'm from Hannibal, Missouri. I'll be 60 in December. So that means I was born in December of 1964 into a musical family. My dad, I still play gigs with him. He's 88 years old, and he's a very serious musician. And I was fortunate to grow up around a lot of the guys that he played with that took an interest in me, because they'd have rehearsals or jam sessions, and they'd bring their kids, and all the kids would go outside, and I'd stand and listen to them, and they'd let me play every now and then. And what else could I say? If you're a jazz aficionado, I take pride in announcing this. John Coltrane recorded A Love Supreme, maybe his most famous album, December 9th, 1964. I was born December 15th, 1964. And then Christmas Eve, 1964, Wayne Shorter recorded a landmark album called Speak No Evil.
Speak No Evil.
Yes. So I was born when this jazz had kind of hit its pinnacle, and let's see. Yeah, I was just fortunate. Like I grew up. My dad had a partner in crime who was a guy named Cleet Webster, and he was a drummer. And actually, Cleet was roommates with someone from Springfield who's ended up being one of the most important jazz musicians in the history of the art form, Charlie Hayden. I don't know if you guys know who he was, but my teacher was roommates with him in L.A. So that's kind of my first connection to Springfield in a way. There's another story that goes with that, but I just grew up with my dad having musicians over to the house like just about every day. And this is back in the days before CDs. He had a record collection that was in every room, and up until the time I was in maybe 5th or 6th grade, he had an organ trio. And believe it or not, there was a scene in Hannibal, Missouri, and right across the river is Quincy, Illinois. And I think maybe I was in 4th grade when he got a regular job, but I just grew up playing probably every day with him until I left to go to school when I was 18. So, you know.
Good.
Yeah.
I know we've been friends for so long, but did you play other instruments, or was drums always it for you?
Yeah, it's pretty much drums. I just dabble with the piano some.
And I know as a young man, when you got into junior high school, basketball was an important thing for you.
Yeah, I'm still thinking about declaring myself for the draft, actually.
Yeah. What was it? I know you've told me these stories. I know all this stuff, but I'm going to try and guide Marty through this to give you a picture of how his youth was. There was a point where you were thinking NBA might be your place, but then something happened that made you decide music was really it for you.
Did I tell you something about that?
Yeah, something about...
Well, okay, well, I'll say this. There was a guy, you can find him, there was a guy named Bill Overton. You know Bill?
I know the name.
He's a saxophone player.
Yeah.
He was an artist in residence for the Hannibal Arts Council when I was in high school. Maybe I was a sophomore. He was there for a couple years, and they used to have these jam sessions over in Quincy, Illinois, which is just like 17 miles across the river from Hannibal. And I would play there every Sunday, and there were a lot of guys there. And this is back in the day when I'm dating myself some, but this is back in the day when all of the hotels would have a ballroom or a room where there was traveling bands in the hotel. You guys remember that? And there were all these great musicians that were coming through Quincy, and they had 2 or 3 hotels, and there'd be traveling bands, and those people would come and sit in, and I just started being more into playing music than playing basketball, actually.
Who else, other musicians did you get to see through those hotel bands or people that came to Hannibal?
I wouldn't
when you were
remember
young?
anybody's name. I do remember some musicians from North Texas State that were in these traveling bands that were killing. It made me think about wanting to go to school there. This is back in the mid-late 70s when Johnny Carson had his big band on television, and just about every talk show had a big band on that stemmed from spillover from the swing era. And I had to go to bed at like when that Johnny Carson theme came on, I had to go to bed, but my parents would let me stay up if Buddy Rich came on the Tonight Show, and he came on a lot. And when I was 14, maybe, I think it was the first day of 8th grade, I came home from school, and my dad worked a rotating schedule. Sometimes he worked 8 to 4 for 6 days, he'd be off for 3 days, and he was home when I got home, first day of school, and he's like, I got a surprise for you. I'm like, so we got in the car and drove to Quincy, and we went down on this strip where there was these bars, and I'm like, what's going on? And we walked in the bar, he opened the door to the bar, and the Buddy Rich band was set up there. The Buddy Rich drum set was there, but the band wasn't on stage yet. The guy that was my teacher was maybe as far as from here to the speaker there, and he had a seat, and when we walked in, he did like this, and I went and sit by him, and my dad went somewhere else, and I sit and watched him for, I don't know, 2 sets or something. It was amazing to be that young, and I just had never seen music on that level, and you know, there'd been stories about him being difficult to deal with, and when I was 14, I was the same height I am now, but I weighed like 120 pounds or something. And they took a break, and I remember him pissed. He was pissed at the saxophone player. I do remember that. He was like vibing Steve Marcus, but he was just destroying the drums, which was, now looking back on that's like a part of history with my instrument, because actually, you know, Jeff, we play the only bona fide American instrument, the drum set. Yeah, it's the only really bona fide American instrument, and so there's not a literature like there is for classical saxophone or piano. There's just like, we've got Chick Webb and Baby Dodds and Louis Bellson and the guys that played with Basie, Joe Jones and Buddy Rich, and I got to see Buddy Rich up close, and he was absolutely in terms of watching somebody from a certain era, he was the quintessential swing era drummer. But this was in the 70s, and they were playing some Weather Report music. They played Birdland, and he's playing the hell out of playing rock beats, like just killing it. They took a break, the band standing at the bar, or Buddy Rich is at the bar with a crowd of people around him, and I was walking past him, and he looked over and saw me, because I was the only kid in there, and he said, hey kid, what are you doing in here? And I looked at him, I'm like, I play the drums too. And he's like, come here, you play the drums? You should have been my kid. And he hugged me, and he had sweat all over him, and I'm like way taller than him. But that was a great experience. And then in Hannibal, let's see, that was 8th grade, maybe I was in ninth grade when this happened. The Hannibal Arts Council had Dizzy Gillespie come to Hannibal. And man, that was an experience. I had no idea that, because I got to spend a little time with him, that I was near somebody that was such a leading figure in being a visionary for 20th century music, not just jazz, but Dizzy Gillespie and Charlie Parker like really blazed the trail for the direction of music, and he had a young band with him. And so this is back when there was junior high, so the junior high band played, and Dizzy played a song with us, and somewhere in the Hannibal yearbook, there's a picture of me and behind Dizzy Gillespie, and it's just the two of us in the picture, and I'm like 15, And so they played, and there's a guy that's out playing now named Tommy Campbell, who's the nephew of the great organ player Jimmy Smith. And when I walked in to see, to the concert to see the assembly that they did for the school, Tommy had a drum set set up regularly, but the cymbals were way up here like that. And I'm like, what the hell? And I'm looking at it, and then he walks in, he's like 6'7", right? So he's kind of watching me play, and I'm 15, but at that time I still thought, I was probably more into Julius Erving and Kareem than I was Buddy Rich, and that was going to change real soon. Tommy's watching me play, and then the assembly ended, and he was inferring that he was willing to give me a drum lesson, which I should have taken it. And at the time, I think he was 23. You can find some videos of that band on YouTube. And he's like asking me if I want to hang out, and I didn't. And what I told him was, I was like, man, I'm going to the gym. And he's like, to play basketball? And I'm like, yeah. So he goes with me and my cousin, and we ran the gym that day, beat everybody. He was a great basketball player. Then we went back to the concert, and Tommy took us. My parents had gotten me a ticket to go to the concert, but he took us backstage to sit in the wings. So my cousin and I are sitting on the edge of the stage as the band's playing, and whenever Dizzy wasn't soloing, he'd come back in the curtains and talk to us. And I had no idea, like, I've realized now, like, what a precious moment that would have been to have spent some time with one of the real true innovators of the art form. So those experiences kind of led me to where I am today, but that's just this lucky stuff, I guess.
So did you start working playing drums with other groups besides your dad? And getting out on the bandstand and getting that feeling? Yeah.
There was one other kid when I'd go to these jam sessions that was a year older than me, and he's in New York now, and he plays with everybody. In fact, it's weird that you mentioned this. On Facebook maybe a month ago, I saw that this friend of mine from Quincy, Illinois, his name is Matt King, great piano player. He's playing gigs with Tommy Campbell now, the guy that was playing drums with Dizzy. It's weird how that works. We have actually a very small community globally of jazz musicians, and part of that might be that what we account for, like, less than 1% of record sales every year. We are actually the Galactic Federation, is what I call us. Yeah. I was playing with my dad a lot. He gigged all over the place, and I remember junior high moving the drums out to the van, and my classmates were going to a sock hop, and I was going to a gig. And there were some older musicians that used to call and ask my dad, can we use Marty on a gig? And some people he'd let me play with, and some people he wouldn't. And I realize now that some of those people that were calling were probably drinking or whatever on gigs. So I started playing gigs with just around the area. And I went to Mizzou in 1983, and I wasn't a music major, and I'll get to that in a minute because I want to talk about our jazz studies program at Missouri State that Randy's responsible for. It's a big deal, and it's incredibly important just for being an American, actually. But I went to Mizzou in 1983. When my dad took me to the dorm, he told me, I made the first jazz band. I was a freshman. And he told me, don't play music off campus. He didn't want me out gigging because he knew it happened, actually. I just wasted his money, and I was gigging all over the place the second week I was at school there. So
sometimes parents guide you to those things.
Yes.
I don't want you to do that. And what are you going to do? You're going to go out and do it.
Yeah, don't touch that light switch. Yeah.
So how long were you at Mizzou?
1 year.
1 year.
Yeah, gigging, not going to class. And I joined it was a great experience for me. Looking back now, I'm glad that I took that path. I wanted to go to school at North Texas or William Patterson's in New Jersey or Berkeley, and my dad rightfully didn't think I was responsible enough to be that far away from home at that age, and I wasn't. I joined a blues band that was pretty important in my development as a musician. It was a band called Chump Change. You guys remember them? I was 18, started playing with him, and that was like the authentic blues stuff. Like those guys didn't play jazz; they were blues musicians. And I want to be specific in describing this. The blues tradition is it's in all American music: bluegrass, country music, rock, jazz. Blues is in jazz and in rock, but not the other way around. And I learned a lot playing with him. There was a guitar player named Babe Martin who died. Maybe you guys remember him or heard him when he came here. They used to come down here a lot. And man, that was really an education, playing that traditional blues music. So I continued playing with them, but I didn't do well in school. So I ended up coming to school here in 1986. Here's another connection to Springfield that was important for me, and not jazz. Babe Martin knew I was going to come to school down here, and he said, as soon as you get there, get in touch with Don Ships. So I did, and I started playing with him, and I was playing with Babe Martin at the same time. And I was and am a jazzer. That's what I play. But I play other music too, but I don't want to sound snobbish, but
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I think if you can pilot the space shuttle, you can fly a jet or propeller plane. And I'll talk about that a little later, but this whole jazz tradition, specifically pre-swing era jazz music, I feel like we are America's classical musicians, actually.
No, I agree with that completely.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been exposed to musicians in Nashville that are on the road with country artists, but when they hang out by themselves, they play jazz, and they're really fine musicians. So I think that engaging in that level of artistry and the creativity that's open through improvisation and jazz musicians and the spontaneous composition, and in order to do that, the deep level of understanding of music theory that you have to have. So that's a great analogy, that if you can fly the space shuttle, you can fly a Cessna prop plane.
Yeah, Jimi Hendrix, John Bonham, I hear him quoting Max Roach in drum solos, and I could keep going, but so came here in 86, and I want to talk about this guy a little bit. He's responsible for me being here, and he doesn't even know. He's been one of my best friends, and one of my partner in creating music. And so I mentioned my drum teacher. My drum teacher I'd go to these jam sessions on Sundays, and he and my dad were just best friends. And sometimes he'd call, and I'd answer the phone. Hey, is your dad there? No, he's not here. And then he would critique what I had played at the jam session. And then he'd tell me, you're going to be home for a minute? And I'd say, yeah. And he lived in Quincy, Illinois. He would drive all the way he'd hang the phone up and drive all the way from Quincy. I'd be waiting to take him 30 minutes. And he'd come to the door, knock on the door, and I'd open the door, and he'd have me like 4 or 5 albums and get in the car and leave. Just like that. Like, check this out, man. And he was my teacher, but it wasn't ever really about mechanical things with the drums. Like, it was like hanging out with Yoda for him. There's a lot of things he told me when I was 11 that I'm kind of understand a little bit now. It was about understanding how musical events unfold, telling the story when you play. So one of the albums that he gave me was a big band album by Woody Herman, but it was a really modern album. It's that Woody Herman album called Giant Steps.
Oh, yeah.
And Ed Soph's playing drums on it.
Yeah.
And I used to play along with that album when I was 12. And so one day I'm in school here, and I was doing the same thing here that I did at Mizzou. I was hanging out with Richard Bruton and listening to music all day, every day, and playing with Don Ships and Benny Mahan and Rex Meredith. Who else? Huey, Walpole, all the guys that were in
those guys were the bedrock of the music scene.
Yeah.
In the 70s, 80s. Yeah.
That was my music education until later. But anyway, I'm in Sun Villa one day, and Richard called me. it was raining that day, and he's like, hey, you're not gonna believe this, but guess who's in my living room? And I'm like, who? He's like, Ed Soph's over here. I'm like, what? He's like, yeah, come on over. So I went over, and Soph's sitting in Richard's living room with a cat on his lap, and they're listening to Coltrane records. And I went in, and he and I started talking, and I'm pretty sure he could tell I was really serious, because I was telling him about listening to that record that he was on and asking him about specific things that he played. And so he was going to be here for a few days, and I asked him, how much would I have to charge you for drum lesson? He said, don't worry about it. So this is back when the campus was way different, and there was a house over, which is campus now, but the band, the music department owned this house, and everybody had their drum set in it.
Oh, that was over on Florence Street.
Yeah,
They had
right.
a group of 3 or 4 houses, and it was like the band office and the percussion house and
Yeah, so
there's soccer fields now.
yeah, he'd come here and do these camps with Jim Widener, and I look back on it now, I didn't understand, but I do these camps sometimes now too, and at 5 o'clock you're done. But he used to come over, he'd call me, or I'd call him, and I'd pick him up, and every night we'd go play duo drums, and he never charged me, and he did that 3 years in a row, 5 nights when he was in town. We got to be friends, and he was kind of trying to recruit me to go to North Texas, and I just, I was a young man. And then he told me, there's a graduate that's going to take a job here in Springfield, so can I give him your number, or will you? So it was him. And as soon as he moved to town, we just started hanging out a lot, and
Yeah, the first time we met, we played.
yeah. So, I'll continue.
Hey, how you doing? Call a tune.
Yeah. I'll continue with this. So he's here, and he's new on faculty, so I played in his jazz band because he's my boy. And you remember when you had Mike Steinell come here?
Yeah.
So there's a professor at North Texas that came to school here, and he came and did a clinic, and I played with him, and maybe a few months later or a year later, he was a guest artist at Mizzou, and he called me, and I'm a student here, but I'm not really a student. I'm just studying Elvin Jones and Tony Williams on my own and not doing well in class because I was an economics major, and I hated it. So I went up and did this concert with him in Columbia. This would have been 92 or 3. And as it turns out, there were some graduate students from North Texas, and these graduate students in North Texas had played in his big band when he was a graduate student. And the band had a grant with the National Endowment for the Arts and Chamber Music America. They were artists for them, artists in residence. And I joined this band and moved away for a long time. And indirectly, he's responsible for that. That was like a springboard for me, moving to the East Coast with that band and experiencing playing music with people that had been to conservatory, and we were playing original music, and they were way ahead of me. Took me a minute to catch up to them, but when we moved to the East Coast, I was in another environment that was a priceless experience. That was my music education. He's really responsible indirectly for it because Mike Steinell wouldn't have known me, and it's just funny how things, how they come together.
Yeah. That rural arts grant thing, because originally the band was in Decorah, Iowa, right?
And it was 3 graduate. Well, the graduate students at North Texas won the degree. 3 of the guys didn't want to go do the gig. It was Brad Turner and Jim White and the bass player.
Pineda. Not Pineda?
Man, I hope he doesn't see this.
Mike Pope?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they got a guy from Mike Noonan. One of the guys in the band had gotten his undergrad at Berkeley, so he got some students from Berkeley to come there. And actually, the drummer that was there before me is the drummer on that hit record that Nora Jones did with Da 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 da.
Yeah.
Da, da, da. That's what's the name of that
Why
song?
I didn't come? Wonder
Something,
why? Yeah.
something like. I hope she doesn't see
Something
this
like
either. But yeah,
And how long were you there in Decorah?
Decorah for 1 year, and then we went to Blytheville, Arkansas, which was an experience for 2 years, and then to Washington D.C. because we had gone. What was that thing that we did? It was something through Baldwin Pianos, and what was the actress's name? Jane Alexander.
Okay.
We had an educational presentation that we did there, and we ended up moving to D.C. I don't remember how all that happened, but that was. I think that's probably the second best music scene in the country, actually, after New York, D.C. I'm not the only one that says that, but I've had people mention that to me. So I was there for 12 years maybe, and that was a great experience. I got to play with everybody, like a lot of guys whose records that I'd had for years. So it's too many to even mention.
Yeah. So how influential and what was that growth period for you while you were with this quintet, the Unified Jazz Ensemble? And just to fill everybody in, the community provided you a house where all 5 guys lived in the house, and what their job was in the rural arts community, they hung out, practiced all day, they rehearsed together, they wrote original compositions, they learned tunes, they go to the schools and do clinics, do concerts for the community.
Then they'd send us on the road all over.
Yeah. And how was that in terms of your development to have a year in Decorah and 2 years in Jonesboro, or in Blytheville, Arkansas, to have 3 years living with the same musicians? I mean, it was like a real band.
Oh, yeah. It was called the Rural Arts Initiative, which in many ways was great because we were secluded. And that was a great experience for me because I had to learn how to learn other people's music. And when we were in Decorah, we went to Canada for a gig, and when we were gone, Jazz at Lincoln Center that Winton Marsalis runs went to Decorah and played, and one of the trumpet players in the band met a lady there and started coming back to see her. And we came back, and he came to one of our gigs, and we hit it off, and he's like, Marcus would love you. It was Marcus Roberts, who had just left Winton Marsalis's band. So one day we were actually in the studio in Minneapolis, and we got home. This is back in the days of answering machines. We hit the answering machine because we were gone for 3 days, and then Marcus Roberts' manager called me, and I flew to Florida where Marcus lives. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he's on a bunch of Winton Marsalis records, and I started playing with him kind of intermittently for a while. He was trying out 3 drummers at the same time, and he ended up choosing Jason Marsalis, who's Winton Marsalis' younger brother. And Jason still plays with him. This is 30 years ago, maybe. Yeah, and
Jason was young then.
Yeah, he was a little kid.
Yeah.
He's a genius.
Yeah.
And so was Marcus. When I say genius, I don't mean just a musical genius, but like you could probably have a conversation with either of those guys about quantum physics or something. But guys that move music forward that way, it doesn't happen by accident. There's highly intellectual and with the right work ethic to move things forward. I've been fortunate enough to be around a few guys like that, and they're special, you know. So, and Marcus is special. He's absolutely a genius and just a unique human being, and it's probably why his piano playing is the way it is, because he's really one of a kind, you know. Yeah.
So with Marcus, I know this story when you were with Marcus playing with his trio and you were out in L.A. Was it the Playboy Jazz Festival?
Yeah, this is a crazy story.
And when you got to meet your hero?
My hero, Elvin Jones, whose birthday is actually today. Did you know that?
Well, happy birthday, Elvin.
79, or September 9th. Elvin Jones is on all the classic John Coltrane records, and he played with everybody. This is a crazy story. It's like you might think I'm making this up, but I'm not. So I'm in Tallahassee, Florida, rehearsing with Marcus Roberts, and there's a bass player who's at the top of the food chain now named Reuben Rogers. He was 19 at the time, and he was going to Berkeley. And we were rehearsing. this is the night of, man, this is crazy. This is the night of the O.J. Simpson car chase. We're rehearsing.
Does everybody remember where you were when that happened? I was at a jazz camp with Steinell in Kansas.
Yeah.
And we
Yeah, I was with Marcus, and he's such a, he's like just rehearsed, just destroying us. Like, you're not doing, it was just, he knew what he wanted, and he's blind. And he went in the other room and came back in and was like, y'all, I hate to be messing around, but he's running. So we stopped the rehearsal, which is, that's something Marcus wouldn't do. He's like really, really serious. So we go into the room and we're watching the car chase. And when Marcus wants to make eye contact with you, so he's got a hold of me and he's like, man, what are they doing? I'm like, well, he's in the back of the car and they're just following him. And he made a comment about what he thought actually happened, which I won't say in this interview. And the next day, this gets crazier now. We fly from Florida to LA. So I'm in Hollywood the day after the car chase. I was playing at the Playboy Jazz Festival at the Hollywood Bowl. And when I checked in, now it gets even crazier. So a week before the rehearsal, we were in New York. Do you remember the rock band Living Colour? Yes. Yeah, so I'm in the hotel and I open the Village Voice and Elvin Jones is playing at this club called the Metropolis, which is not there anymore. I was with Brian Delaney.
Yeah.
So a friend of ours who went to school here and went to North Texas comes and picks me up at the hotel, and Marcus had recently recorded an album with Elvin Jones on it. I hope you're following this. I know it's all over the place. We go down to hear Elvin. The club's here, sidewalk, people are coming this way, we're walking, and we got to the door at the same time the drummer from Living Colour was there. And I just looked at him and was like, hey man, like I knew who he was. He's like, hey, I had to come hear my favorite drummer is what he said. I said, yeah, me too. And he's telling me, stand in front of me. I'm like, huh? He's like, stand in front of me. So I stood in front of him, and he's got an illegal recording device. He's going to bootleg Elvin Jones playing. So, I sit down and watch Elvin, and I had studied him for years and realized when I was watching him play that I had it all wrong, what I thought, the way I thought he was interpreting what I call decorating music, which is what the drums do. So heard that. A couple weeks later, O.J. Simpson car chase. We fly to L.A., and people are abuzz about O.J. Simpson. I go backstage to set my drums up at the Hollywood Bowl, and Elvin Jones's drums are there. He played right after we did, which was, I thought that probably shouldn't have happened, Here's where it gets really crazy. Bill Cosby was the MC, sitting right there. And both those guys had a strange fate, is all I'm going to say. And I was near both of those things. And after we played, I'll say Cosby was really nice to me. And this is at the height of his show. And if you remember, his oldest son-in-law on that show's name was Elvin. Remember that? Yeah. Sandra's husband. And I said to him, because he's maybe a frustrated drummer, Mr. Cosby. And I was like, hey man, I know why you named your son-in-law Elvin. And he's like, you know it. So we played, and if you've ever been to the Hollywood Bowl, we finished playing, the stage spins and the next band's playing, and Elvin Jones is playing after us, and I'm thinking, that's like having to play before Michael Brecker or Coltrane or something. So I went to the side of the stage, and I'm standing there like and Cosby invites me to sit with him. He's sitting on stage by himself. He's the MC. He was the MC before things went sideways for him, I guess. He was the MC at the Playboy Jazz Festival. And I sit and listen to Elvin Jones. And of course, I'm not even starstruck by Michael Jordan if Herbie Hancock's there, so. We finished playing, he finished playing, and after the show, Elvin comes up behind me and hits me on the shoulder, and I turned around and we just started talking. And I learned a lot in that conversation with him, in that I feel like he's one of the innovators that's actually changed the direction of the instrument and all music, and maybe the most humble guy I've ever met. Just like he was asking me questions like, where are you from, and you know, just how long you been playing, and suggesting things I should maybe practice. And that whole day was surreal, like from the O.J. Simpson car chase to Bill Cosby to Elvin Jones. Crazy, you know.
So tell us a little bit about your time and some of the musicians that you met and got to work with and learn from during the time you were in D.C.
Okay. There were a lot of, it's a great music scene, probably just because D.C.'s, the world's run from D.C., not just the United States. So I got to be around a lot of different people. It was just a really diverse community culturally. And who would I start with? There were a couple bands that I started working with around D.C. and Baltimore, which are kind of the same city. I was traveling a lot. And there were a lot of guys that you wouldn't have heard of, but we backed a lot of people that are really famous. Like there's a saxophone player named Rick Margitza who had played with Miles Davis some, and we got to be really good friends. I used to play with him pretty regularly. There's a saxophone player named Gary Thomas who was running the program at Peabody at the time. And he played with a drummer that's maybe my favorite drummer named Jack DeJeanette. And back when I was playing with Gary, he was flying out on the weekends playing with Herbie. And I just wish I had done a lot better being more dedicated to practicing at that time.
And when you say Herbie, we're talking about Herbie Hancock.
Herbie Hancock, yeah. Saxophone player that's Randy's recently befriended named Eric Alexander. Played with him a lot. Another saxophone player, Vincent Hearing. I know I'm leaving. A guy that's really seems to be popular on his own now. That's spent the last few years playing with Kenny Garrett. He's out on his own now. A guy named Benito Gonzalez. Tim Hagen's a trumpet player. There's no way I can remember everybody. There's a lot. A legendary piano player named Harold Mayburn, a legendary piano player named James Williams.
Played with Charlie?
Never played with him. Oh, I played with Charlie Bird, who's on a lot of the Stan Getz albums. Pioneer
Bossa Nova.
Bossa Nova.
Classical guitar, but a jazz musician.
Yeah, and this is a great story. Somebody called me to sub the gig for him, playing with Charlie Bird. So I went in and played the gig, and I didn't think, right around that time, though, I was playing with some guys that were apparently way up in the Latin jazz genre that I didn't know who they were, but I'll say I was the only guy in the band that didn't speak Spanish, and they would tell me what to play. So I was doing that. I went and subbed this gig for Charlie Bird. Charlie Bird's brother, his name was Joe, and they're on a bunch of those Stan Getz records. The gig ended, and I went in the other room just waiting to get paid, and I looked up, and the band was at the bar in a huddle, and they're all looking at me. And I thought, uh-oh. And they came over and said, hey, do you want to join the band? And I'm like, the drummer was a friend of mine. I was like, I don't want to, what's up with, forget his name. He's a great friend, right? But forget his name. And they said, we're going to fire him anyway because he plays too loud. And you play soft, and we'll hire you if you want to do the gig. And I took the gig, and I learned a lot about playing Bossa Nova with them. We went all over the place. And then one day, we were in Philadelphia, and remember when Doc Severinsen would not be on at the Tonight Show, Tommy Newsom would be there. Tommy Newsom came to play with us. And I was like, whoa.
With Charlie Bird's group?
Yes, and I'd never heard him play on the Tonight Show. He was a monster saxophone player. He sounded just like Stan Getz, like just way up there. And that was an experience. He and I got to be friends. He was very opinionated about music. He didn't really like any of the modern jazz that I like he didn't like Brecker, but Tommy Newsom, and he's a freaking badass, you know. So that was.
So that must have been a wonderful experience. 12 years in D.C.
Mm-hmm.
So as a young man, you're living the life of a professional jazz musician and making a living playing music.
Yep.
And at some point, you decided to come back and pursue further education back home.
Yes, and that didn't really happen that way. I was in a spiritual crisis with struggling with alcoholism. So I moved back here and went back to school. I didn't know what I was going to do, but things were at a really dark place when they could have been a lot different. And I came back here, and I was 42, and I hadn't even finished my undergrad. I went to school at SIUE and finished, and then they offered me grad assistantship. And my plan had always been to go back to the East Coast. I'm glad I'm not there now. I don't want to live in all that congestion. I'm happy here. So Randy called me, and he had just started the jazz studies program at Missouri State, which is great because since there wasn't a jazz studies program when I went to school here is the reason that I didn't major in music. I tried for one semester. For a guy like me, it just didn't work. I didn't want to just marching band and playing something other than the drum set didn't work for me. I'm a drum set player. I don't play timpani, not trying to, you know, the drum set's enough of a challenge. So once again, because of him, this next chapter is, in terms of me just being an educator, is because of him. Because of him, indirectly, I ended up on the East Coast meeting all these people because of Mike Steinell through him and a lot of stuff. So, yeah, when I started here, 2013.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, the first year you were adjunct, a couple of years adjunct before we brought you on
true.
Full time.
Yeah,
So,
I was driving down from St. Louis every other week.
So how do you feel the difference is being in your artistic level of creativity and being able to work with some really wonderful musicians that you had experienced living in D.C. and through your periods with the Unified Jazz Ensemble and being on the road and traveling, not just in the United States, but internationally? And how does it feel at this point to you in terms of that professional performing musician to now a combination of performing and educator?
I don't think that there's any substitute for experience in anything. And my musical education wasn't really at school. But I'm sure my situation is different because my musical education was home with my dad and his friends. I was trained a little bit different. And today, I played in Kansas City last night, and the gig ended at 2:30 a.m., and I drove back to rehearsal at 11:15 today. And I feel like I kind of have to do that to be an effective educator for what my role is for what I want for the students. We've had some really talented jazz studies majors that have graduated from the program. Randy's retired now. Randy, myself, and pianist Kyle Aho have really great working relationship where we all offered something different that's really important in developing competent musicians. We're not necessarily trying to train people to be a band director. We're training people, like there's guys working in Branson, there's guys working in Nashville. There's one guy's on a major, doing some major country gigs, right?
Yeah.
Dave.
Jacob Heiser's out in Boston in between New York as a jazz musician, educator.
Brant Jester, Drew Axley, there's a bunch of them. They're doing great, and our goal has been to train musicians to be ready for everything. He's a big band specialist and teaching people how to read music. My goal has only been, I tell guys, when you graduate here, I want to be able to recommend you for a gig if somebody calls me for it. And that takes on a lot of stuff. That's like even being able to play with a blues band like I did. A guy that can play with a blues band, can play with a big band, can back a singer. And then Kyle gives people a lot of artistic freedom. And the reason I think this is incredibly important just in terms of developing musicians is, man, how can I say this? After having been out being a professional musician and I went back to school, I was very much appreciative of the opportunity to be shown a path that was mainly about a Eurocentric European approach to music, like in getting a master's degree and even being a jazz studies major, to have to study European music theory, form and analysis. They take us through a pretty extensive history of what they call Western music that starts with Gregorian chant in Europe and goes all the way through Stravinsky. And what we offer is we're offering an education in what we call American classical music. And I think that what I've witnessed is students that go to American institutions of higher learning to study music get a degree studying European music, but then we have to go teach American kids. There's a tradition that happens in American music that's it's inclusive of American culture. Everybody's an immigrant here. Our music, American music, the jazz traditions, is equal part European and equal parts African. And it's got aspects of European concert music, like with the big band having to read music. It's got aspects of a relationship that music has with dance that comes from Africa that's different than ballet. It's got everything's got an aspect of the blues in it that's uniquely American. It's got aspects of understanding dialogue, improvising like I'm improvising now, and other traditions of music. Your decisions are made for you before you play. The conductor's telling you how loud, or and in our music, those decisions are determined by your vision and you having to compromise with what somebody else is hearing in real time, which is what democracy is about, actually. So we're in terms of just what we're trying to pass on to the students in terms of a jazz tradition. We want students to develop a certain level of proficiency, but we also want them to learn a language, which is, it's what we do. I guess I could talk about that for a long time, but I'll stop now.
Yeah.
Well,
I think it's...
he's responsible for that. I just want to say that.
I'm glad you're here. We're glad you're here to have an artist with Marty's pedigree, teaching here at Missouri State University back in Springfield. And I think it adds to the culture of our community. And I think jazz has experienced, it's always, in my 35 years here, it's been kind of up and down and kind of trendy, and it could be, the latest, thing, and it would run its course, and then, there wasn't always a lot of gigs, but there's a lot of restaurants in town now and places where you can go hear jazz in Springfield 2, 3, 4 nights a week, and that's all because of a lot of different things, but having Marty and Kyle come and teach in the jazz studies program, and we're offering the jazz degree, and having new young musicians feeding into our community is something really beautiful. So I'm glad you're here, and we have a few more minutes left for a few questions. If anybody wants, anybody have any questions?
I got one or a couple. I think your presentation tonight is one of the very best we've had.
Oh, thanks.
Sorry more people weren't here to hear this. Mm-hmm. I've got a connection, not really a connection, but I'm known around here really for a broadcaster of bluegrass music, but I have a very strong jazz connection in my life and history. Know some of the people that Randy knows, and followed the North Texas band from the late 60s, the time of Dean Parks and Lou Marini and those
Oh, yeah.
guys.
I just want to say, I feel like jazz and bluegrass are different sides of the same coin.
Yeah, almost so.
Absolutely, like just in terms of like
Licks.
theme and variation and improvising.
Yeah.
Same thing, just
What you said
totally
about
different.
the American classical
Mhm.
and following the European and all that, right spot on to me. One of the things I wanted to ask you from the beginning of of your presentation though was, did basketball influence your percussion work and vice versa?
Probably, and I didn't even know it, but you know, I call basketball the high-powered ballet. It's improvising too. It just, you know.
There's I think there's rhythm in athletics.
Oh, yeah.
There's flow
Yeah.
and rhythm and timing
Improvising.
and being spatially aware of what's happening around you. And as Marty could speak to this, and he already did a little bit about that quartet or quintet, and there's a basic form and a chord progression, but everybody has different ideas about how things, and if you're not listening and paying attention to what's around you, that group of 5 musicians will never reach the level of being greater than the sum of its parts, right? So something really special happens, and it's like that in basketball. I mean, to stay with Michael Jordan, and so, you know, what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, and there are, you know, every instrument's got a role or position, just like in basketball, there's a point guard, and there's a power forward, and there's a post player, and there's a shooting guard. And in jazz, there's a role that the bass player plays. In classical music, there's a guy with one stick that determines how the events unfold in music. In jazz, there's a guy with 2 sticks called the drummer that says the same thing. It's not just me saying that because I'm a drummer, but I didn't mention this. Maybe, 2 years ago, I got called to play a gig with Winton Marsalis, and right before we went on the stage, we're standing there. I'm still thinking about this, and I hope I get a chance to play with him again because I'll be a little braver. But he just looked at me and was like, you know this is your band, right? I'm like, what? He's like, you a man with an instrument that powerful. He's like, wants the drummer to conduct the band. And I learned a lot about humility from him in that we were on stage, but when he came into the rehearsal, he walked up to me and the bass player and hugged us and looked at us and said, man, I can't wait to play with you guys. Instead of it being like, I'm Winton Marsalis and you got to play with me. And then he's like telling me, like, you're the drummer, you got to conduct the band. And all night he's playing, but looking at me, wanting me to lead the music somewhere. And he's like, come on, you know. So, you know, there's a role that we all had. And his analogy was leader of a wolf pack or a herd of geese leads from the back. And that's, as far as jazz goes, we're playing music with an unrecognizable destiny. We don't know where it's going, and we need to be comfortable with that. As great as Beethoven's Ninth Symphony is, it's like me rewatching Pulp Fiction or something. You know. Anyway.
Well, we want to thank you, Marty, for doing this, and Randy, thank you very, very much. It's one of our good ones.